So first, thanks everybody for coming. I'll give you a little bit about myself, and please, I want to make this interactive. I'm not a slide PowerPoint ranger, whatever we call them, but myself, I've been doing this for about 30 years, mostly in the DoD. I ran DoD PKI, worked at NSA, did a lot of special operations, jumped out of airplanes, all that cool stuff in the Army. But my last few jobs were working directly building mobile devices, secure mobile devices on Android Snapdragon, working through how identity in this continuous multi-factor environment that we're building. So think beyond our OTPs, beyond our biometrics, our conditional factors, all those things, and actually working on chipsets to harden and make these secure environments. So did a lot of that. My wife asked me to stop jumping out of planes, so I decided to be a consultant. So here I am at EY. Apparently, when you don't know what you want to do when you get older, you become an executive director and you run digital identity solutions for a firm. So that's me in a nutshell. How I like to work on these things is small. Let's interact, ask questions. If I can answer something, I'd rather do that than go through these. But the intent is to kind of understand how we see Ernst & Young, how I see specifically this environment, this data-centric, this really rapid changing environment in which digital identity is really the function of it. And I'll walk through what we've coined or deemed digital identity so that it makes sense, because it's went from IDAM to ICAM to IAM to all these other different naming conventions to talk about what we're going to talk about today is how do I know that the user is who they say they are? How do the things about that user make me feel even more comfortable to allow them access to what? Data. Because that's what this data-centric environment is. And it's rapidly growing. All of our clients are consuming data. They're getting more data than they know what to do with. They're not tagging it correctly, and they're not understanding what their users are doing with it, right? So that's the whole security premise that we'll talk about. Kind of walk through the agenda. It's fine. I think it's another one of, hey, these aren't just EY's, disclaimer. They're me. But so this is how EY sees. This is how I see. This is how the 450 digital identity teammates just in the US that I have. EY is what, 350,000 global now and growing. I think we'll be at 400,000 projected. The largest, about 60% of our revenue is digital identity. We do more identity governance transformations. We do more IDP transformations, access management transformations, Active Directory cleanup, which everybody knows Active Directory, and the amount of things we do in there. And we also build solutions. I run all of our labs. So everything we see today is an integration that we've created a solution with, right? So it's not just something we put on PowerPoint. This is how we sell ourselves. This is how we bring security mindsets to our clients. But breaking it down into kind of two pillars. One pillar is external identities, which we call XIM. I think before we've had B2C, B2B, and you also have kind of the functionality of what CIAM is, that consumer. So we break the B2B and the XIM down in the C2C, B2C, and B2B2C, because we have to add some more letters to it to make it awesome. And so those are really dynamic environments, right? Like 9 times out of 10, I go into a conversation with one of my clients. I'm like, hey, how do you see the consumer versus the customer? Oh, my customers are buying all this stuff from me. Like, that's not how we see it. We see any B2B relationship. Think big pharmaceutical. When I'm doing research inside that environment, I need to bring in another pharmaceutical environment to have this work relationship. That's a B2B. 1099s, all these contracts. So I'm a B2B specialist because that's what I do for a living. So we call it a customer because essentially that's the relationship we establish. And those things provide different requirements, right? I don't need to give you access to all of my environment. I don't need to give you the data rights that you require for everything. I need to specialize, I need to redact, and I need to make sure that you only get to see and interact with the data that you're authorized, right? And so that's the first foundational thing of workforce environment. Come on in, come on in, come on in. You came in the door, I'm gonna, come on and sit down.
We're looking for somebody anyway.
Oh, perfect, perfect. And so that's kind of that first interaction where outside of your foundational security of your workforce management, you start to interact and bring other things into your environment. A big proponent, which we'll talk about that we work on all the time, is third-party B2B relationships. So not only that it's a third party, how do I provision them? How do I give them access? And then most importantly, how do I deprovision them, right? The most exploited vulnerability we have is that deprovisioning. B2C is such a large growing environment, specifically around the fact that nobody knows what's in there. specifically around the fact that we just want our customers and our consumers now to have all these access with frictionless speed, right? Because I don't want to take stuff from you and use it because that's where I get in trouble. But I also want you to have access and know that, hey, I'm going to get in here. I have some type of thing I need. I'm going to get it and move, right? So it's speed. It's all about that. And we'll kind of walk through how we see that and how analytics and AI and ML are kind of adapting and providing some enhancements to that, but also making additional vulnerabilities from it. Challenges, emerging legacy. A lot of these challenges you can see here, I've kind of blackened in the ones that we're really seeing a lot. And those challenges are really the drivers for why are we doing this? What do we need to do? And it's weird and also exciting from the same perspective that a lot of the digital identity stuff that we do is based around a fire. Something's already happened. It's not typically a proactive environment, right? It's working, we're good with it, oh dang, we can name off some SolarWinds, other people of that nature that have had these different vulnerabilities based off of an $800 username and password. But these ones are huge, right? Regulatory compliance, big in all of our large consumer environments, big in all of our banking environments. Regulatory compliance, $400 or $500 million fines from a cyber digital identity thing that they didn't have as to meet all the standards. Third-party access we'll go into a lot. Transformations, everybody's transforming right now. So a lot of this stuff is built around new tool, new applications, how do I integrate and what do I do with these things? And then a lot of the stuff up top too is a focus for SaaS, decentralized, ISaaS, all this emerging environments from blockchain, AI, ML, all the things we'll keep talking about. But does it make sense to everybody, kind of how we lay it out and how we see it? I know it's scattered, but I like to kind of show it that this is the player's board, and on it, these are where the different things live, right? So what do? We build solutions. As soon as we find problems, we go, all right, I need to build that solution. I think everybody that knows digital identity and IAM, passwordless, we're all chasing that nirvana. How do I get to passwordless? In the government, when we were working on it, we figured it's more than just you, right? And the more I know about you, the more you're willing to give about you, the more I can secure you. And then privacy came into play. And then all these other functionalities came into play. So passwordless, well, that makes more sense. It's a buzzword. I don't have to have a password. That's cool. But it's all driven around, like, how do you look at what a hacker can do, what those vulnerabilities are, and what those exploitations are? And you still have to have that foundational password inside the cryptography backend of that anyways, right? So it's still going to be there, but it's a cool word. And I'll tell you, industry-leading manufacturers are all driving passwordless. Why? Because they need a kiosk where they're building planes or they're building things that multiple workers can go to, get access to data, have something on them, something about them, and something they know that's incorporated into I walk up to the machine, a session is established, I can understand how that thing is built, I walk away, that session is deprovisioned, next user comes in, right? So that's the foundation of, if I give them a password or a card, they lose it. If I give them something and they need to remember it, they lose it. So right now what's happening in this industry is they're just doing everything open in the clear. So they're walking up and everybody has access to the same data. And they're seeing a lot of financial considerations that are causing some issues there, right? So you look across the top just to kind of give you, this is my view on how we look today. This is how we look at digital identity. This is how we look at the solutions that are around. And so the top, policy-based authorization, PBAC. Historically, we've had the different roles from rollback to ABAC to now PBAC, which is all entitlement-based, right? So it's this next phase of how we look at access management and access control, where I don't need to know that Nick is an executive director at Ernst & Young, and this role comes with these different attributes that I'm given to. I need to understand more about that. I need to know at runtime what Nick should have access to, so that when he makes that machine makes a decision to give me access, it can permit or deny me at the same time, right? So taking this roles and attributes and taking the entitlements about you and then consuming them through a policy-based access is the transformation we're seeing a lot of companies go to, because everything from a role is manually manipulated, right? So if you're manually manipulating something, the likelihood that IT service desk employee is going to click the box that gives them God rights and they don't know what they're doing is a high probability, right? So we see that a lot. And we'll talk a little bit about it, but essentially you can kind of go down and see the drivers. And what do we do at EY? Well, we build solutions. We like to build solutions around how to solve these things and take it on, because at the end of the day, this isn't CrowdStrike and I'm doing endpoint security. This isn't Zscaler and I'm looking at transport for zero trust environments from a VPN-less solution. This is very complex, authoritative solutions that require access manipulation, and they also require you to have a lot of things about the user in order to ensure they have the access, right? Because at the end of the day, business stakeholders drive the world we live in. And if the business stakeholder doesn't have access to their data quickly, then that's where all the noise comes from. But do we know that that business stakeholder has the right access to the right financial data? And are they in the right location at the time that they're accessing that? And are the things about them truly validated in your solution? And that's not one solution, that's identity governance, that's Active Directory, that's policy-based access. And how do you get to that? Well, you create something called an abstraction layer. And we'll kind of walk down through an abstraction layer we call orchestration. And orchestration now is this next generation that we're all driving to, and that's why we say 2026 is we're at the early stages of transforming a lot of our clients with orchestration. Why? Because we're in a constantly changing dynamic environment where vendor lock is true, right? How many people that have had a conversation with, I'm so stuck with this capability, this OEM, because it's so customized. If Nick dies, he's the only one with the key to actually unlock the door to know how to configure something to make it work. And it's just become inundated on this process that's now culturally embedded inside of your environment, right? And so orchestration allows you to essentially put that tool, an orchestration tool, between the user and your environment. And it could be your business environment, your workforce environment. It could be a partnered environment. It could be a consumer environment. And that user experience never changes, right? Because that UI sits in front of the user, and what goes on behind it are recipes that are built to give access based off of policies. And so now you're transforming, because everybody's on a cloud-first journey, right? And everything that's inside of a cloud-first journey is policies. And so you look at these policies and this language that define the policies, and it's built around how do I enable those entitlements to make the decisions on behalf of my workforce and to ensure that I can audit those environments to validate compliance, right? Right now, if you were to hire EY to come in and do an audit of you, we're gonna audit one specific tool, and then there's 15 of them, so that's where we're gonna continuously audit, right? But with orchestration, I can tell you when that person made the request. I can tell you where it was validated, whether through an IGA or through an IDP, like an Okta or a ping or something. I can tell you what they did with that data, not specifically how they manipulated it, but what they did with that data, because that was time-stamped inside of the orchestration tool. So imagine complexity of all this identity environment, and you go to one tool, you make constant verification. It's also doing all the different things you need from a verification, deprovisioning, and validation, right? All in that one tool.
What's the tool?
What do we use? Well, there's lots of tools. They're all based off of OPA, but we use Strata.io. And the reason we use Strata.io is just specifically around the connectors that they already have out of the box. The engineering side of it and the way that it integrates is it's very fluid with what we do. And it's very...
Yeah, go finish.
Okay, yeah. So Strata.io Mavericks is the tool that we use. There's other ones out there, Hexa, Styra, there's all these other OPA tools. But when we've tested most of them, and we just continuously go back to that one from an integration perspective. But to say that any of them are better than not, it's just the way that we have our lab set up and how we typically work with our customers. Think about most of them are Savient or SailPoint from an IGA perspective. Most of them are Okta or Ping, right? Most of them are, you can see the subset of SAP GRC, and you can see the subset of Workday and all those other things, Snow. Out of the box, they already have all those connectors, and so when you have this already pre-provisioned, your 80-20 rule already is established. This is my IAM or reference architecture, right? So we've kind of set the principles here of where we look at. So 3-tiered layer, as we were just talking about, multi-tenancy, how do you get to this business environment? How does Azure, GCP, what are you using? Everybody seems to have a multi-tenant environment. Maybe more on a Azure, but also have a little bit of AWS on the side, so you kind of see that. But all this down at the bottom, these fulfillment layers are what we've talked about. Plain ID, Styra, Hexa, Savient, Entra, Microsoft, OneCosmos, all these different solutions that are tools, right? They solve a problem, or maybe they solve a couple of problems, but they're all fulfillment layer problem solvers. And so now what you have is you have to make an individual call, and as we were just talking about, the orchestration layer allows you to make those in an automated fashion, right? It orchestrates those decisions and says, all right, if Nick needs access to this data at this point, I need to verify through AD, through IGA, and then I need something from him to say that this is who he says he is. And so it's all running at that point in time versus a single point. It's a multi-point mesh for decision making, right? And so that's how it allows you, and then it changes the complexity of the language as it goes across the cloud barrier, right? We all know that Google has a different language than AWS does, and so that orchestration tool allows you to live in two different environments as well, right? So you can put it outside of your corporate environment, you can put it inside your corporate environment, and you can put it outside your cloud and into your cloud environment as well. But this is how we like to look at it. This is how I present it as when we start to understand the complexities of your environment, how do they live together? Again, this is just more on the orchestration level because this is where we go. This is kind of how we start everything. Think of a transformational environment. We just had a large company that came to us to say, hey, we are divesting $10 billion, and we need to understand how to do application migration. We need to understand how to do network migration and move these virtual environments, clone, stand up, and move and create a new greenfield, right? And so that's what orchestration does because it allows me to establish basically a coexistence barrier between the old organization's brownfield environment and the new organization's greenfield environment. And so the user continuously logs in. But what at that policy layer, the policy says, if Nick wants access to company A, then I need to get verification from company A, whether it's their IGA tool, their AD. But if Nick wants access to company B, then I need to go to company B's authoritative sources, right? But the user doesn't change. I don't have to change their user identity. I don't have to change any of the username, password, or any of that. I don't do password sync. Everything's done behind the orchestration tool, vice changing the things that the user interacts with, right? So it takes that friction away. But again, then that sits there between, same thing if you want to do a tool replacement, right? If I want to replace my IGA tool and I want to move from Savient to SailPoint or vice versa, I can actually take that 2-year process and make it more of a streamlined process because I put orchestration between the user and what's going on, and it allows me to have the flexibility to move data, to move the applications, to integrate with that. So. And again, I like to just show this slide because why? What if I do nothing? You know, these are actual facts from a lot of our clients and how we look at it. And I always like the top left corner of $70 a call. We have companies that have 400 or 500 calls a day, $70 a call. So it's addition through subtraction as well, right? So I'm going to add a tool that makes your user experience more dynamic, and I'm also going to use the ROI against taking down your costs. We took EY's requests down from 1,400 to 110 calls on our tax tools as soon as we implemented policy-based access. We've taken time on target to do application migration from 4 to 10 weeks down to 40 hours or less for an application, depending on whether it's medium or large complexity as well. And then over here, $56 billion lost. I think everybody's seen the news when we're talking about security, cyber insurance, right? We're starting to see the trend in which healthcare and PII and cybersecurity insurance is no longer, it's really voided if you don't have an MFA solution. We had a large healthcare environment, had $100-something million violation, and that violation was going to be paid out by the cybersecurity insurance. The one state, Ohio, their Supreme Court said, we won't stand by that because you didn't have the proper security to validate that the user was who they say they are with an MFA solution. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this trending across more than just healthcare as well, right? As they're going up to re-up their cybersecurity insurance, you're seeing a lot of them come back and say, we've got one more year to get these things done in identity, or we're not going to have a re-up for our insurance, which, you know, you're paying, you know, pennies on the dollar for any of this stuff, and then when it hits, it's big money, right? So we talked about that, and then what do? We're talking about transformation, Web 2 to Web 3. So we had this really cool conversation going on about what we see right now and how we're transforming and how we're building solutions. And then we're adding in this Web3, convergence. I call it a fusion because we're not like Web 1 to Web 2 where we separated. Web 3 is going to have all the same principles, but we're adding on these additional layers, right? The AI/ML side of it, blockchain from a foundational support environment as well, like transport-wise. So running from all this centralized, centrally managed, central everything to a decentral user-owned environment. And what that does is that extends your boundary as well, right? Now your corporate environment extended all the way down to you, and you have to have this trust. I need to trust the device. I need to trust the source, the authoritative requirement, how I provision that user, all those different foundations, right? You guys seeing yeah, go ahead. Okay, perfect. We'll talk about that. So again, I got 3 slides left. I just wanted to real quick talk about, so the first foundational side we talked about what were the 4 areas and the 2 pillars that we see. But we're also seeing this enhancement transition where AI is enhancing, but also providing a lot of vulnerabilities, right? Because you don't know what's going on behind the curtain when AI is enabled, right? It's great. ChatGPT has been like the last 6 months at EY's, working with everybody. How do we get ChatGPT into our environment? And then as soon as they get it in, then they realize that people are using ChatGPT to write contracts and put they're at home putting corporate data into ChatGPT to roll a contract out. So enhanced speed, but exploitation and vulnerability that's greater than we've ever seen. And so now you wrap all this stuff, which is all about metadata tagging. It's all about getting access to data quicker, but how do you validate and verify that all that access is there? And I only show these slides as like the transitions, right? 3 really amazing people up top and how much they're investing trillions and billions into this environment. It shows the importance. It shows how this is the next landscape to enable everything we do, speed up everything we do, but also open up a lot of vulnerabilities to the things we do. And that's based off of a lot of policies, and that's more of the global policies, right? GDPR, China laws. And we see that from, oh great, we're spending trillions and billions, and now we're also getting billions of dollars of fines. So it's the, hey, we opened it up, we invested, yay, 1.3 billion for violating EU data privacy rights. Another billion for advertising and infringement on Amazon users, and then collection of personal data. But all these things weren't with malicious intent. It was they didn't understand what was the complexity of going on in their environment and all the things that AI, because that model is always expanding, it's always growing. So you always have to see what that is. So my last slide, this is just kind of how we see things and how we work inside of digital identity and how we like to take it on. So we use the 4 R's. Realization, I think that's what this conversation's about, is having conversations and having a realization that if you do nothing, what does that cost? If you just sit around and don't look at it from a multi-complexity dynamic mesh, what does that cost? But that realization is how relevant to your stakeholders are in your organization to understand those complexities as well, right? When I was in the Army, I always called it green light syndrome, meaning like all of my bosses ever cared about was the green light was on their computer, or that the green light was on if something worked, right? Didn't give a crap how it happened, just cared that it worked. Readiness, how ready are you? If you're a compliance organization, how are those different things required? How are you pushing towards them, and what's the readiness that you think you have? Resiliency, again, these are just 4 great words of realization and readiness allied in that resiliency. Like how resilient do you think you are? And it's self-rationalization as well. And then remediation. As soon as you identify it, how quickly can you remediate it, and what can you do with that data? So those are our 4 R's. I like to use them at the end. And this is kind of how we work on it. Workshops, demos, assessments, proofs of concepts, implement, and to do managed service. So just from an EY perspective, I think that's me in a nutshell.
The other question about,
yes, sir.
About the notion of using AI and LLMs like ChatGPT in an identity environment. There's limited auditability, almost none. You have no verification typically available to you in terms of how the models are actually behaving, or even necessarily what the models have been trained on.
Yeah.
Unless you build your own from
Right.
scratch.
Right.
That's possible.
Right.
So how can you incorporate that kind of technology into? An authorization system.
And so early on, and a great question, because at the end of the day, the value of your model is the value and strength of your AI, right? Where we use AI is more in the cross-border security right now. And so it's more focused around models to understand IP obfuscation. How does these policies and these rights play across in like redacting data, right? So how do we build these things for that environment? So early on, we run a lot through Snowflake right now as well. So we use a lot of their foundational models. We've built our own to kind of see how it plays, but I see a world with all the things, those solutions up top, the automations, the orchestration, and then you're validating through those models. You're validating through AI as you're updating this continuous ecosystem, right? So now you're taking these data audits on what these users are doing, and you're tunneling them through your Snowflake or your AI, and you're either cleaning up the data, verifying the metadata tags, and then making those changes across your entire ecosystem from an identity perspective. And I think it's going to transcend on that is more moving into the next phase, which is the provisioning side, right? Now, as I'm going through the provisioning, the things I need to collect about the user, the experience to adapt to that user's model as well will be that next phase. And then overall, it's maintenance at that point. It's how do you continue to expand and grow and then not have manual audits and verifications of access and all those things as well. Does that hit the question?
Yep.
Any others?
Are you seeing a greater interest option services you guys across the client base?
Yeah, it's a war on talent right now, right? Just be blunt with you, right? And firms are sucking up as much identity people as we can. Last year, we hired so many new digital identity employees based off of 60% revenue growth, right? And that's the dynamic of the change is it's not just you come in and do one thing. I'm not implementing a SIEM and using Splunk to build dashboards. I come in and I start to clean up, clear up, give you a roadmap, and then implement and manage as well, because there's not enough people out there to manage this, right? So it's that war on talent is, I can't afford to pay for 3 people to do this when I can go to a firm that has 400 people that have done it at large scale across the globe. So I think hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, because this is some of the clients that we talk to aren't necessarily know of, like looking at finance, trying to check what they already have legacy-wise, right? But we're not necessarily aware of this discussion with the firm like you. So it's just interesting, how that's the attention to that, not just a workforce issue and efficiency, but really looking forward, years forward, on top of this.
Yeah, so there's also like the transition is not it's not an if, it's a when, right? And so that was the first part about the proactiveness versus the reactiveness. So we're also seeing a lot of that legacy environment that at the NSA, it was always about price to execute and level of vulnerability, right? So if it was really expensive and really wasn't very vulnerable, didn't care. It's when you started to get here. And it wasn't about here because this was, when it's very complex and very cheap, that doesn't align, but it's really here. And so you're starting to see those things, especially with AI, from a perspective of the exploitation model, that the ability to just magnify those vulnerabilities and make them even that less complex than what you assume they are based off of current state, right? And that's where I think the transformation is coming. Is no longer that sign of $56 billion in lost identity-based, vulnerabilities, right? That's a big number, and growing and growing and growing. And it's no longer cyber espionage, it's identity-based vulnerability, so. Good question, thank you.
When you go into large organizations like the ones you're working with, who's driving this?
Ooh. So it lives in a lot of different lands. HR ends up owning a lot of the B2C, and is moving out of HR in either the CISO or CIO land. Each industry is different, right? So if it's a security-based industry, large manufacturer, the CISO owns it. There's other ones where and like TMT and other things, the CIO owns it, so it just lives differently. Healthcare just depends. It really depends. There's not a simple way to put who is the buyer in any of these, because we're also seeing, I didn't talk about it, a convergence between physical and logical identity, right? Where now these access points, access control, it becomes a part of your ecosystem from an MFA perspective. So now I can not only know what you are virtually and what you're doing inside of your virtual environment, but I can take cameras in my environment and say that you were walking here. I can do geolocation in my corporate environment. I can use those access data points, and that's how we kind of expand the passwordless environment as well. But yeah, I've walked in where you've got large banking companies that they have 4 different directors of IAM, and they're focused on 3 different pillars of what's going on in the company. And 2 of them report to the CIO and 1 reports to the CISO because they look at governance as a security.